getting together and trying to keep it going as long as we're able to do this from year to year.
After 48 years, it's surprising to see that some of us here. And,
quite a few of us will go on.
What were you at the time?
A pharmacist, mate.
Yeah. I was a fire controlman.
And you two guys served almost a half-century ago?
That's right, yeah.
It's got to be a great thrill.
It is.
Good to see each other, right?
A bunch of the old guys I haven't seen for 50 years almost.
This Joe Reccio, incidentally, has a nephew. Joe's dead. That's me down here, and this is Mr. Baker right here.
That's him right there.
Well, we like to think we're unique, and why we say that, it was a unique ship built for a unique purpose, and once that job was done, we, like all things, started to fade into history.
Unique indeed was the trim but deadly destroyer Escort, better known as the DE. 565 of them were built in the early days of World War II to escort and guard convoys and relieve the larger and faster destroyers or work with task forces. 50,000 sailors would serve aboard these tiny dreadnoughts, dealing with 2,000 German submarines and hurricanes in the Atlantic and Mediterranean, and taking part in epic battles and invasions at the mercy of typhoons in the Pacific. Now it's time to meet the surviving shipmates of these DEs nearly a half-century later, as they arrive in Buffalo with their spouses in the summer of 1992 for the 17th Annual Destroyer Escort Sailors Association Convention. They look for missing buddies, become reacquainted with shipmates now a bit grayer and pudgier, swap sea stories, relive fantastic liberties, but most of all, talk proudly of their mighty little destroyer Escort that took on the giants and brought them home safely nearly 50 years ago. Hosting the convention was Steve McCarskey, captain of Buffalo Chapter DESA 4 and one-time crew member of the USS Chase, DE 158.
DESA 4 was organized November 11th, 1978.
How many men do you have enrolled?
Right now we got about 155.
And they represent the number, how many, roughly? How many?
Oh, I would say about 90 Ds at least, 100 Ds probably.
Now, who's got a job putting this convention together? Was it very difficult?
Oh yes, I worked on it for 2 years.
Sam Saylor, a federal government retiree, is president of the Destroyer Escort Sailors Association. He served aboard the USS Connolly, DE 306.
The first ships came off the way in 1942, and they were strictly built for ASW, anti-submarine warfare. They had at that time the latest technology as the sonar, radar, the new depth charges, a little later on the new Hedgehogs, which were quite an ASW weapon, and they were assigned to sail with and protect the convoys. And in 1942, I believe, was the highest tonnage that was sunk in the Atlantic. The Pacific was having some sinkings, but nowhere near the Atlantic, and our fight really was there at the time. But by mid-1943, scales started to balance, and from that time on, Germany couldn't build submarines fast enough. We were sinking them faster than they could build them, and the Destroyer Escort played a major role in that task.
When the Canadians raided Dieppe, the radio station, they got the German code that the Wolfpacks used. Well, the United States had this information. We developed special Haftaf, they call it, radio, and operators were trained in German code.
On the USS Guadalcanal, under the command of Captain Dan Gallery, later Admiral Dan Gallery, with 5 destroyer escorts, were sent out purposely to capture a German submarine because our intelligence, naval intelligence, had said that the Germans had come up with something unique that allowed the German submarines to stay submerged. They didn't have to come up and recharge their batteries. And of course, this was the snorkel device. And they captured the U-505. Now, the U-505 crew, when it was forced to the surface, tried to scuttle their submarine for obvious reasons. The first time since the War of 1812, the word was passed aboard the DE's away boarders. Now, that was an old pirate term. That's when you left aboard the other guy's ship. and they took motor whaleboats out with the crew. They went aboard the German submarine, fought their way aboard the German submarine, got down through the conning tower and found the explosive devices and de-armed them, got the pumps running again, and were able to keep the submarine floating and towed it back to Bermuda, one of the best-kept secrets of World War II.
John Cosgrove, a veteran newsman, is DESA's national representative in Washington, D.C. He helped commission the USS Gendro, DE-639.
This ship, of course, was a very special ship to begin with. It was made for a special mission in the Atlantic to counteract the Nazi submarine menace. It was adapted to the kamikazes and almost like an anti-aircraft ship. We had to survive that in the Pacific. But the special thing was that, particularly in our ship, and I found it characteristic of so many DEs since we've been meeting in conventions here over the years, was the spirit of the crew. Quite an unusual group of men.
There were 12 officers and 200 enlisted men. And these were fellows all the way from, like I was, a young 18-year-old kid who had never been to sea before in my life, up to some veterans. In those days, being 18 years old, a veteran was someone who was 24. And the officers were probably 30, which we thought we'd never live to be that long. And they were from all over the United States, and mostly were green people.
You're pointing out to that young black-haired young fellow on the end there. That was you, huh?
Yeah, this
and
one.
what were you aboard the Boston?
I was a motor machinist, mate, 3rd class.
Motor Mac 3, huh?
Motor Mac 3, yeah.
And who was the other gentleman you were parking to look like an officer?
This one? Oh, that's Paul Baker, right here.
You associated with these officers. They were okay, were they?
Well, the real gentleman was not one of our officers. It was the communications officer, and that's why he's with us there. We had that much respect for Mr. Baker.
How were these guys? You were a lieutenant?
Oh, yes, sir.
Did they toe the mark?
They did. They supported me when I was on the bridge like nobody, and I've thanked them many, many times for the...
You had a brand new ship that never was tested, and you had a crew with mostly teenagers, and the officers a few years older. How did you pull it off?
Training, really and truly training. You know, when not only my ship, but any ship, when you first went aboard it, they started a schedule of training that, you know, we all thought was unfair, but later on in the war we found out that that's why we came through. And it was a lot of dedication, it was a lot of teamwork, it was fellows working together, knowing that, you know, if you didn't do your job and the other fellow didn't do his job, your ship wasn't going to make it. There was and still is a saying in the Navy, one hand for the ship and one hand for yourself. And using that thought, you know, we fought the ship first and then worried about ourselves second.
What happens when the boys start talking about the old days and swap sea stories? What do the ladies do?
We just sit around and listen, but we found out that they've been telling the true stories all these years, because when they compare notes, they're telling the same stories.
Don't exaggerate a little each year, maybe just a little bit?
It was really surprising that they all told the North Atlantic story with the waves coming over, and they remembered it the same way.
You had another enemy out there called a typhoon.
Oh my!
Can you tell us any?
Well, we were in that violent typhoon that the 3 destroyers were lost, and you know, destroyer escorts rather were not built to ride heavy seas, and we were in that for the 2.5 days that it wreaked its fury on us, and it again was one of those. Didn't know whether you were going to make it or not, but again, through the superiority of the ship handling of our officers, we came through it.
I was on a ship 2 days when off of Bermuda, went through 3 days of a hurricane, and
could do a lot of damage. Huh?
Mighty sick boy for a while there. Bobs a little bit, but it rolls a lot. 45-degree roll, and built like a destroyer, shaped like a destroyer, but of low draft. There was quite a few torpedoes went underneath.
Some of the DEs have gone on to great acclaim. You name some that come to mind?
Of course, the one that comes to all our minds is the USS Samuel B. Roberts, the Sammy B, as we affectionately call it. The Sammy B in the Battle of Samora, along with another DE and 3 destroyers, were guarding a rather large escort carrier group when they were jumped by the main element of the Japanese battle fleet. And the Sammy B suffered 14 major caliber hits, and I mean from 16 down to 8 inch, before she was eventually sunk. But she was in combat for 3 hours under those conditions. They call it the DE that fought like a battleship. And they were successful in thwarting the attack. They saved the jeep carriers.
Dr. Martin Davis, a retired university professor now in the investment field, is a naval historian who had served on the USS Pettit, DE-253.
I've had an exhaustive review of what would have occurred had the war continued, and the role of the destroyer escorts and the rest of the vessels in that particular invasion had it occurred. Had the invasion of Kyushu, which was Operation Olympic, occurred, and we were scheduled for this on October 1st, actually we were in countdown until then. Had the invasion occurred, the Japanese were well prepared on the island of Kyushu and on the mainland of Japan itself. Had we invaded, there would have been, it's estimated by a number of sources, over 1 million casualties on both sides. And as you take a look at the dropping of the bomb, and in retrospect, we all have had different feelings about it, but my position has not changed. I feel that had the bomb not been dropped, of the many people that belong to this organization and of many people here in Buffalo today, many of them would not be here. In the invasion of Japan, they were prepared to meet us at sea, and they had developed a number of new types of weapons and had developed suicide battalions, underwater swimmers, developing a new type of breathing gear, tunnels that were kept a secret for years and years after the war. And they were aimed toward hitting the landing craft and any of the ships such as destroyer escorts and high-speed transports that would be coming close to the mainland.
You would have been a sitting duck in Tokyo Bay.
We would have been.
The DE sailors took time to pay tribute to 4 U.S. chaplains who gave up their lives so others might live. A ceremony in downtown Buffalo honored the memory of 2 ministers, a Catholic priest, and a rabbi aboard the troop ship Dorchester, carrying more than 900 American soldiers. In the early hours of February 3rd, 1943, the ship was hit by torpedoes from U-boat 223 in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic off Newfoundland. As the ship was sinking, the 4 chaplains gave up their life jackets and guided the soldiers to lifeboats. And as the ship was slipping beneath the waves, survivors saw the 4 chaplains standing with arms linked and heard them praying in English, Latin, and Hebrew. Some destroyer escorts managed to survive, seeing service during the Korean and Vietnam Wars. But what's happened to the DEs since then?
Up until 8 years ago, there were still 36 of them in existence, primarily in foreign countries. As of today, the number has diminished, and we're down there somewhere around 15 vessels. It's estimated if things continue as they are, within 10 years there'll be none.
When you're alone with your thoughts, Sam, how do you remember your destroyer escort?
I remember the men first. I remember the crew first. I made lifetime friends aboard there. You don't live on a small ship for 2 years without knowing every intimate thing about everybody that's aboard there. The ship itself is really a piece of iron, and it comes to life when the men come aboard it. So I remember the crew. That's how I remember it.
Yeah, they're happy times, and the nice part of it is we keep together. We keep searching for shipmates that we can't find for some reason or other. They don't know about DESA. They don't know maybe we have an organization. But we're on the constant search, and the sad part of it is when we find someone who maybe just died a year or 2 earlier.
It was a great thrill for these old DE sailors to meet up with their former shipmates after almost a half a century. But for some old salts, there was no reunion. Maybe next year.